Thank you so much for joining us today. It is my pleasure to have Abhay Gupta, founder and CEO of Bidgely and a platinum sponsor of Parks Associates Smart Energy Summit, join us today. My name is Elizabeth Parks, and I'm the president of Parks Associates, a market research and consulting company that also hosts the Smart Energy Summit. So thank you so much, Abhay, for your time and your support of our upcoming event. I'd like to go ahead and just jump right in. The research and market continues to emphasize the growing demand for clean energy solutions. And so interested in how Bidgely is playing into the net zero emissions goal. And maybe you can just give us a brief background of some of the latest things you all are working on.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. We are. Thanks for inviting us here. As you know, Bijli is playing a premium role in bringing analytics in the energy industry and use of analytics in everyday decisions. And as we learn, net zero is becoming it's a big agenda for the new government, the whole climate program as well. So we are making a difference in the industry by helping people make and utilities make very important decisions which are data driven. We are extracting information to help quantify people what is the benefit of when they buy an EV, who is buying an EV, when are they charging, how does their charging affect on the peak usage, how does it affect on the climate, the effect of carbon scores, etc. When should people charge their cars? People who have solar, what options do they have in terms of creating the maximum impact, positive impact on the environment? Ultimately, we bring the personalization into the energy industry. The energy industry is something has something missing, which is as a consumer, I get my energy bill, but I have no clue what and how is happening behind that bill. So we are bringing the personalization in the industry by helping people understand the impact of their actions, and where is their money going and what they should be doing based on their energy, their rate plan, their appliances, etc.
That's great, and certainly see some of that in our research, that the ability to lower cost on energy bills and understand that data behind these programs is helping drive further adoption of new programs. And also just have an interesting data point out of the field showing that 42% of households are highly likely to choose a provider who offers energy from renewables like solar and electric vehicles over traditional energy sources. So certainly seeing that growing demand. Given the past year with COVID-19 and shifts in the consumer market, can you share some of the specific trends that you all are seeing take shape, and maybe focus in on some of the changes that you all are noting?
Absolutely. We can start with the industry trends. Of course, the one of the industry trend we see is more and more adoption of smart meters. I think the smart meter adoption, in my opinion or knowledge, has already crossed the 50% mark. So we are beyond the majority level, and you're seeing that adoption. Now, of course, with the smart meters comes a lot of data. So the second trend we are seeing is many utilities are hiring the new digital officer, chief data officers, who are figuring out what do I do with the data. So new IT department initiatives are being set up by large utilities to say how do we do the digital transformation, because now we have deployed the smart meters and we have the data. So applying artificial intelligence and having big data is something new to utilities, and we see a very big investment by utilities after the hardware is deployed into the software stack on both big data and analytics AI engines. The trends on the consumer side that we see are smart home trends. Of course, there's more and more adoption of the devices like smart thermostats from Ecobee and Google Nest, and smart devices like Alexa. I mean, now Alexa is embedded in many different devices. So smart home adoption, although it's skewed in certain type of appliances like thermostats and speakers, much more than traditional appliances, but that adoption is increasing. And the other trend, of course, we see is EVs, which is everybody understands and knows. The adoption of electric vehicle is just at some point, I think few years back, it was like if. At this point, the question is how fast, right? So With comes EVs, comes the trends like the stress on the grid. So almost every single utility in the country is looking at saying, as the penetration of EV increases, what is my plan to manage my grid? Because you have to manage when people charge their electric vehicle. So on one side, there is positive of electrification, more revenue, more KWH. But the second side, there is a challenge of managing when to charge the cars, because it can create the stress on the grid because of the demand charges. So those are the trends that we see in the industry for now.
It's amazing how quickly this time can go by, but I want to thank you for your insights. Thank you for your participation at Smart Energy Summit. I certainly look forward to talking with you again, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Pleasure to be here.
Hello, we're excited to welcome you to Smart Energy Summit. For decades, Parks Associates has studied the impact of technology on the consumer and utility markets. Smart Energy Summit Engaging the Consumer addresses the evolution of these markets, the impact of COVID-19 on energy management programs, and new opportunities to drive engagement in utility-sponsored programs. Last year, Smart Energy Summit was our last in-person event we were able to host in February in Austin, Texas. This year is a little different. Instead of hosting across 3 days, we will host our 12th annual Smart Energy Summit across the year. COVID-19, along with a growing focus on green energy solutions, has added new drivers to adoption of energy management products at home, as well as new interest in solar, electric vehicles, and other solutions that will help households save energy and become more self-sufficient. At Smart Energy Summit, we'll present our latest consumer research showing the impact of COVID-19 on attitudes and usage regarding energy at home, as well as the expansion and monetization of energy management and other energy-focused offerings through consumer engagement, new business models, unique partnerships, and innovative technologies. Virtual panels and networking sessions feature executive-level experts from multiple industries, including utilities, service providers, retailers, software providers, and manufacturers. We look forward to sharing more across the year with you. Join us for these upcoming sessions. February 23rd and 24th, Impact of COVID-19, Consumer Behavior and Energy Management, Home Services, Rethinking Utility Revenue Models, Energy Management Platforms, Accelerating Growth, DERMS, Solar, Storage, and Microgrids. On April 28th, MDUs, Leveraging Prop Tech for Smart Energy Management. August 4th, Next Stages of the EV Evolution. October 27th, Partnerships and Tech Advancements, and Shifting Customer Behavior, Energy Efficiency and Demand Response. Thank you for joining us at Smart Energy Summit. If you miss a live session, you can go back at any time to watch on demand. Go to Watch Replays and click on the session that you want to view. Have you created your own event agenda and swap card? Visit the Agenda and Watch Replay tabs to add sessions that interest you to your own event. You can go back to My Event to revisit any bookmarked sessions, sponsors, and items. We want to make sure that you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors. You can interact with them by visiting the Booths and the Sponsor tab. You can also bookmark sponsors or add items to your event to view later. Sponsors have uploaded extra materials for attendees. Make sure to visit sponsors that interest you to chat with one of their team members or save documents for later. We have dedicated meeting slots set up for break times between sessions. Continue the discussion by requesting meetings from others in the Swap Card platform. Schedule a meeting with another attendee or a sponsor by visiting their page. The panelists and speakers will be addressing your questions live during the stream. During the stream, use the question tab to ask your questions early in the presentation. Go to the poll tab to answer polls that will be discussed during the live stream. If you need help navigating SwapCard, please reach out to our team by mentioning @Parks Associates in the chat box or by contacting one of our team members via our company page.
3, 2. Hello, and welcome to Parks Associates' 12th Annual Smart Energy Summit. I'm Jennifer Kent, VP of Research at Parks Associates, and I'm so pleased to be kicking off our 2021 SES virtual event series. Typically this time of year, we would be seeing you all face-to-face in Austin, catching up with old acquaintances and making new connections. The circumstances of the past year mean we're engaging with you in a new way, but the conversations we'll be having virtually over the next 2 days and across the year are as important as ever. We must thank our sponsors for making this event and virtual community possible. We simply could not have made this event happen and the move from in-person events to virtual events generally without their support. So thank you to Bidgely, Austin Energy, Osiaco, Flow, and American Water Homeowner Services for your support. I'd also like to thank the industry groups and media companies who support this event as well. CEDIA, SCTE, Energy CIO Insights, Home Grid Forum, the Monitoring Association, and the Z-Wave Alliance. We appreciate your support. At the Smart Energy Summit, we focus on the opportunities and challenges in bringing energy solutions to the connected home. And this is really an incredible time to be holding these conversations. As you know, once in a generation winter storm and below zero temperatures impacted much of the country last week and resulted in a major energy emergency in Texas in particular. At the height of the outages, more than 4 million people in Texas went without power, including many of my colleagues here at Parks Associates. We're based in the Dallas area with colleagues in Austin and in East Texas. For most, this meant no heat as well, right? The impacts are much wider reaching than just electricity outages. More than 14 million Texans, which is about half the population of Texas, have faced water disruptions with many still under boil notices. My boil notice just lifted this morning. The power outages affected communications with internet and mobile outages. And as of today, we know that more than 50 people have died from the storm and more than 30 of those deaths occurring in Texas. We know that many of you have been involved in the efforts to keep people connected or to restore power, to think of new approaches and solutions to deliver reliable power, even in or especially in emergency circumstances. I think the Texas energy crisis puts into focus for us many larger trends impacting the energy and smart home space. Trends we'll be discussing this morning, as well as throughout the Smart Energy Summit sessions over the next 2 days and across the year. Consumers changing energy consumption habits at home to start, a growing electricity demand that comes with electrification of space heating for both residential and commercial settings, and growth in the electric vehicle market. Grid resilience and stability. What sources, what approaches, what processes, and what regulation needs to be in place for grid operators to be able to minimize the consequences of an extreme weather event or a malicious cyber attack. The growth of renewable energy sources like wind, solar, and hydroelectric power, and the ways in which both consumer demand for renewable energy sources and new government funding with the new administration may shake up the energy markets. Relatedly, of course, distributed energy generation and all of the disruption and opportunity involved with moving energy generation to the source of demand and allowing distributed resources to participate in energy markets. Finally, the opportunity for those in the energy sector to participate in the larger smart home opportunity, and vice versa for companies established with an established presence in consumers' homes to engage in unique partnerships to provide valuable energy management services to consumers. I want to bring particular attention to the changes we've seen in the residential space this year. I started by talking about the energy crisis in Texas last week, but it really was a crisis within a crisis as the COVID-19 pandemic continues on. The changes we've seen in consumers' lifestyles, work, school, transportation patterns are pretty immense. And beyond the actual infections and deaths, of course, recurring from the virus, perhaps no impact has been greater than the resultant effects on the economy, employment, unemployment, and ability for people to make ends meet. 29% of US consumers and households with broadband internet tell us they are very concerned with their ability to pay the bills as of September 2020. And this is a percentage which actually increased as the pandemic continued on. Yet at the same time, consumers have spent more and more time at home over the past year. 36% of all US broadband households had at least one person working from home in September, and over 40% of broadband households with kids had at least one child engaged in virtual or online schooling. And while various sources indicate that overall energy consumption from all sectors is down slightly in 2020, residential energy use is up, driving up home energy use and driving up those energy bills. These changes to consumers' lifestyles and the increased bills that come with them indicate a fresh opening for products and services that help consumers understand and control their energy use. In fact, 20% of US broadband households told us that COVID-19 has increased their interest in a smart energy solution that would help them manage their energy use, cost, and comfort. 17% indicated interest in smart lighting solutions, and 15% said COVID-19 has increased their interest in an HVAC monitoring service. Despite this, our data shows a pretty big gap between the opportunity and implementation and really the engagement with consumers around energy management solutions. Smart thermostat adoption, for instance, has hovered between 11 and 13% of US broadband households for about the past 5 years, even as some energy providers have made them available for free or highly subsidized. In fact, a consumer report at smart thermostat purchases peaked in 2017 at 9% of households purchasing in the prior 12-month period, down to just 4% in 2020. But as you can see here, intentions to purchase do remain high. You can see that high intentions to purchase smart thermostats actually rose in 2019 and stayed at nearly that level in 2020, when 18% of consumers told us they intended to purchase a smart thermostat in the next 6 months. So this likely indicates that between 2018 and 2019, more consumers, even beyond those early adopters, gained more familiarity with the product, and intentions to purchase rose, but those intentions haven't turned into purchases. Since we capture our data in Q4 of each year, COVID-19 may have simply caused a pause in consumer purchasing, and this may indicate pent-up demand for smart thermostats. When households are ready and able to buy, they may do so. However, it could also as easily point to confusion among mass market consumers in the purchase process, intimidation by the install requirements, or other barriers to purchase that manufacturers, HVAC dealers, and energy providers need new strategies to address. Another area of high need for consumer engagement is in load control or demand response programs. The DR programs are growing slowly. They are by no means yet mainstream. And the number one reason consumers tell us they do not participate in these programs is simple aversion to the idea that somebody else would be controlling the devices in their home. The second most common reason is that a typically low incentive for enrollment. And the third is the desire to simply be comfortable at home. But in some good news, resistance to utilities controlling home devices, there's still a pretty powerful barrier, is waning ever so slightly over time. So 41% of US broadband households that are not currently enrolled in a DR program cited that resistance to external control as a reason for them not enrolling in such a program, compared to 47% in 2018. So with education and perhaps real experience with blackout events, consumers may become more open to the idea over time. So in our sessions today, we will be discussing these key themes further, including how have consumer energy patterns, needs, worries, and priorities changed? Which of these patterns are likely to be temporary and which will outlast the pandemic conditions? How can ecosystem players better engage with consumers with energy management solutions? I'm looking forward to talking with many of our industry experts today on these themes. Let me see if there are any questions in from the audience, and not yet. So just a reminder that you can use the questions tab to submit any questions that you have throughout this whole session. And with that, give me just a moment. I'm going to invite our Visionary Insight speaker, Emily Toulis with Uplight, to join us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, I can hear you and see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. And let me go ahead and get my slides going here. All right.
When you're ready, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you so much. So I'm going to kind of building on what's already been discussed. I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19, of course, on consumer behavior and energy management, but specifically kind of from the viewpoint of Uplight. So before we get started, just to kind of introduce both myself and Uplight, so you have some context on our perspective. I'm Emily Tullis. I'm the general manager of Uplight's orchestrated energy product line. That includes solutions like smart device enabled demand response. So definitely kind of building on what Jennifer was just speaking on. Uplight is a software company working with utilities to engage customers in the sometimes unglamorous world of demand side management. Foundational to our DNA is customer centricity, but also equitable sustainability and decarbonization. And you'll see kind of how that plays out in some of our insights on COVID. I'm going to use our knowledge on customer experience and our focus on the clean energy transformation to share some of these insights we've gathered. So in 2020, I'm going to actually jump through here. And in 2020, Uplight partnered with Sea Change Institute to conduct a comprehensive survey of over 1,000 customers from all over the US. We gain an excellent understanding in how the pandemic has affected their relationship with energy as well as their utility. What we found is about 36% of households are now working from home. And the pandemic has led to 48% of households becoming distracted on how they use energy. And thus, around 50% of those homes have seen an increase in their energy bills. This is pretty logical, right? There's a lot of mental tax happening for all of us right now. So energy is not the most important thing for us to think about, even though bill impacts and kind of our economic hardship are certainly at top of mind. We are seeing an increase in vulnerable customers, as well as a 15% increase in folks having to postpone paying their bills. So these are really pointing to kind of a trend of a shift away from C&I load, a shift towards residential load, and a shift towards, an increase in bills that not all customers are really in a great place to contend with. So we all know electricity consumers are not a monolith because we are all electricity customers across the whole country. But we did find that customers are still just as interested in adopting smart energy saving technologies. Like smart thermostats. So kind of building on what Jennifer was just referencing, we definitely are still seeing an appetite for devices that save energy, such as smart thermostats, but also a drive towards an increase in comfort and convenience as more consumers are at home and are kind of dealing with the in-home experience for the full duration of their day. In spite of the high wage and economic toll of unemployment on Americans, those with the means are still really bullish on electric vehicles. As commutes disappear and folks are staying local, we found that range anxiety has subsided and the garage as gas station concept seems more normal when, you know, your entire sphere is really your house. So interesting trends emerging just on that market side. So I'm going to kind of shift a little bit to how Uplight is using the information we've collected. So one of the things I love about Uplight is our strong culture around design thinking. With these insights on hand, we've been able to better understand the customers in our demand management programs, define their challenges, and then subsequently take action. So ideating on how to improve our programs and user experiences to better meet customer needs, prototyping these adjustments and testing hypotheses with our utility clients, and then iterating as more data comes to hand and the environment changes. So continuously improving within this loop. An example of this has been around updating our messaging for our programs by being more empathetic of the circumstances of COVID, emphasizing elements of comfort and control, financial and community benefits, as well as a frictionless, low-effort experience for enrolling and engaging in our programs. In some ways, COVID is an equalizer that has forced us to think beyond ourselves. We found that when a community element was particularly emphasized, we saw higher levels of satisfaction and engagement with our messaging from our customers. The second modification we made through our design thinking process was to acknowledge a shift from industrial usage to residential demand. We leveraged our partnerships to help residential customers save on their energy usage and be more comfortable while at home. Over the course of just a few weeks back in May, we launched an innovative, high-profile 100K free thermostat giveaway at Consumers Energy. While this was obviously a big driver for getting smart tech into the home, I also want to sing consumers' praises in that they offered to customers without qualifying HVAC equipment a free energy efficiency kit to also bolster their savings with the loads that they do have. So this really gets into that discussion around kind of equity and the silver buckshot concept of, you know, to facilitate the green energy transformation, we need to approach all customers where they are. The benefit to consumers, obviously, in addition to the extreme brand goodwill that was afforded by this opportunity, was a significant growth of their smart thermostat DR program. Finally, one additional insight that we found was that, you know, while in previous years only about a third of customers reported some being home during events, this year it surged to 70%. So this probably isn't too surprising, but this increase of awareness, this drove an increase in awareness events, especially during the pre-cooling portion of the schedule. Generally speaking, folks are more okay with being pre-cooled and less okay with the warmth experience during the event. So we tend to see more feedback from customers during the event, and that's even more true during COVID times with more folks at home. This resulted for us in iterations of how we optimize dispatch and daily schedules, both from the actual device control as well as around the messaging that we send to customers before and after an event. I touched on this briefly before, but really emphasizing that community impact and the benefits of the participation was really important to ensure understanding and full participation in the events. So kind of building on what Jennifer mentioned before of a lot of customers have hesitation to enroll in these types of programs due to that loss of control or the perceived loss of control. And so making sure we have other ways to demonstrate a benefit to these customers and another value proposition besides just, you know, a heavily discounted rebate or a participation incentive is really important. So hopefully I've given you some tasty food for thought on some ways in which COVID has changed how customers engage with both their home and their energy usage. I'd love to open the floor to discussion and take some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. Really great insights, and love that you're talking to the consumers and understanding where their mindset's at, because there's been such a change in all of our patterns and our attitudes and our priorities this year. I wanted to follow up while we wait for questions to come in from the audience. I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you mentioned. So one, it really is interesting that you asked about, have you been distracted by energy use, right? It's really something that most people don't even want to think about. And it is a sort of mental tax. We talk a lot about how the best smart approaches to energy management are not just a connected thermostat, but a thermostat or a product that takes automatic action for you. So you're not having to be called to do something. Is that something that your research is showing as well?
We have dug into some of those insights, and I think they definitely support what you're saying. Customers do really appreciate those features, but they also really need to understand how they work. So one of the interesting insights we've seen with DR programs in particular is we kind of get to this point where customers don't necessarily know, is this Uplight executing this program? Is this just how the Nest works? Is this the utility that's doing something to my device? So they're, especially for customers who purchase a new device as part of the enrollment process and don't have kind of a baseline understanding of how the features function. We do see kind of some confusion around, what is it doing? I don't think it's that smart. It doesn't really understand me. So that's something that we spend a lot of time, developing messaging around, looking in particular at DR events to suggest, hey, here's a way that you could ride through the event. This is what's actually happening on your device. I bring all this up in the context of DR just because I think it points to a larger trend of people saying, all right, we've bought a smart device, but is it that smart? Anecdotally, I can say I'm a light sleeper, and sometimes I'll hear my heat come on in the middle of the night, and I'm like, it's not that cold. Why is it turning on? It doesn't understand. So I think there is that distractedness that's being increased by COVID because people are at home and because they're really worried about their bills. And so if their heat is running and they don't think it needs to be, that does drive anxiety. So it's a really interesting and, unfortunate circumstance.
Yeah, interesting. We do have a couple of questions that came in from the audience. First was someone wanted to know, do you find customers reacting better to more communications around DR events now, or just a change in tone in existing communications?
So going back to even before COVID, our research and testing has shown that people do want to be communicated with about events. I think that's, for DLC switch programs, there is some historical data that suggests you don't need to communicate. You just cycle the switch at whatever duty cycle, and the customer doesn't really need to be any the wiser. For the smart thermostat, because there is a device that is in the home, they can see the little logo on there that something's happening. They can see it in app, and they can feel a change, since we are trying to completely avoid running the HVAC during the event window. We do find that communication does actually drive higher CSAT. With that, we've also found that about 6 hours before the event is kind of a sweet spot for people understanding what's happening and remembering that it's about to happen. I think for, COVID times, what we've really done is kind of adjust the messaging to be more relevant to people who are definitely at home. As I mentioned, going from about a third of folks at home versus 70%. So we haven't seen, a market impact specific to that messaging, the pre-event messaging, but overall we have seen higher engagement with all of our content.
Mm-hmm. There's actually been a few questions coming in really around the specifics of the messaging. So you mentioned, of course, moving to more empathetic messaging. A couple of questions here around if you could share any examples of what that means, and others wondering if people were tired about hearing about COVID-19 and maybe you're empathizing with just their time at home as opposed to COVID specific. Are there nuances to that empathetic messaging that you can share?
Yeah, so I'll maybe go in reverse order there. I think we were more forward on the COVID context earlier in the summer, so in kind of May, June, when it was really new to everyone. And then later in the year, it much more was about, hey, we know you're at home, and let's help you figure out how to get through this event comfortably and, maintaining control. As far as the specific content, we have continuously found that community element to be really valuable. I kind of touched on this in the presentation, but being able to speak to not just, here's your individual contribution during this event, but here is how this affects your community. This really kind of depends on the utility and how progressive they want to be on the value proposition. We have some utilities that are very forward on saying, this helps us avoid a natural gas peaker plant. And we have other utilities that kind of, skirt around that type of messaging. But it really is giving customers kind of that instantaneous satisfaction, that kind of dopamine hit of I'm doing something good. And, there's plenty of psychological data out there that suggests that we do get more satisfaction out of helping our community and engaging with our community than just helping ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing those examples. Last communications related follow-up here. Can you share what communication protocols you're using to communicate your events to customers? And I'm assuming they were specifically talking about, email versus in-app versus text. Are there different methods by which you're reaching folks that are more or less impactful?
Yeah, so we are largely leveraging email. We've just found that to be, for the types of programs that we're running, there is a higher email acceptance rate than you would see for the rest of utility data. So I think if we were to look broadly at all of our residential utility data, we have maybe even less than half of those customers with associated email addresses. But as part of the enrollment flow, in setting up your account for a smart device, you kind of inherently have an email address. So we have really good uptake on those. I think around 75% open rates on some of those emails. So that's been really successful, and it's low impact, lots of good information. The ability to link out is really helpful. We have not actually launched SMS with any of our customers yet. We do have the capability. It's just kind of a whole different ball of wax, from a regulatory standpoint, and an opt-in control versus opt-out type of engagement. So we haven't tested SMS, although I would imagine that would be very helpful, especially if you're sitting at home. So interested in seeing that. We do have, that pathway through the app associated with the smart thermostat. And that's really kind of maybe almost a better and more natural way to understand, I think something different is happening. Let me check my Nest app. So that pathway has been really effective for us as well.
Do you have any thoughts on the smart thermostat market generally? One question, and this may be as much for Parks Associates as for you, but why has thermostat adoption not moved beyond that 11 to 13% adoption rate? And this is a consumer reported number, so I'm not saying that the market hasn't moved at all, but we're not seeing huge jumps that you would see if we really crossed the chasm from the early adopter to late adopter stage, when more consumers are getting into it. Now, of course, you mentioned that great program where there was 100,000 smart thermostat giveaway, I think.
Yes.
So one approach. But can you speak at all to barriers that you see for getting consumers to adopt smart thermostats in their home?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to kind of provide our perspective. And Jennifer, if you want to add anything on from the Parks perspective afterwards, that'd be great. So, what we hear, what some of the things that we've learned from running different programs. We, for example, had one program that spanned 2 states, and one of the states within this territory had never actually had any sort of rebate offered against smart thermostats. And the other state had a program running for 2 years, and the uptake in the state with no offer was, 80% or something like that. I mean, they were so eager for this offer, which really suggests to me that there's both an awareness element of this technology as well as a price element of oh, well, this is interesting, but I don't really want to pay full price. But if there's kind of that extra incentive of a rebate, it makes it a more approachable solution. The other trend that we saw, working with consumers is, there are a lot of customers out there that maybe don't have equipment that merits this technology. I mean, I'll admit as well, I don't actually have air conditioning. And so if I didn't work for a company that manages smart thermostats, I might not have one myself. It is convenient to have the app, but a programmable thermostat is pretty effective at meeting my needs in terms of just controlling my heat for those, 5 months of the year. So I think there is kind of a, similar to what we see with other smart home technology, the voice controlled assistants, those types of things. There's kind of an initial first adopter wave, and then there's kind of a, what does this actually do for me? I am a defector from my Google Assistant. So I was like, this is really cool. And then I was like, why do I have this? So I think there is kind of, a bit of a tension there and just maybe a misaligned value prop for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'd agree across the board. And then from Park's perspective, I would say I do think there's probably a little bit of pent-up demand that people who would have naturally come into the market this year, delayed spending on all sorts of things, including something like a smart thermostat, that even though over time you're likely to recoup the costs, you just don't have the money to go out and buy something like a smart thermostat right now. I also think that there is a gap between early adopters, right, and mass adopters, which we've spoken to. There, sometimes is, especially in the mass adopter market, a little bit higher concern around data privacy and security issues, and a little bit more skepticism of connected devices in general. And so you really do have to prove the value proposition. So I think all of those things are valid and likely playing into this. One thing I would also say on the smart home market in general, so two things when it comes to COVID, when people are home more, one of the reasons that has driven a lot of smart home device purchases is that convenience of remote access and control. And when you are home, you can just control the thermostat, right? That remote access from work or wherever, that isn't as strong of a driver. And then also some people do have, coming into the smart home market, think that smart home products will have these same like hockey stick growth curves that other technology devices might see, like a smart speaker, a wearable, or a new gaming console. And the reality is most people change the thermostat and then don't do it again for 10 years. Right? Or however long. You don't want to have to buy new ones all the time. And that isn't the typical product life cycle for consumer technology. And so once you have one, that need is met for the most part, unless you move, for a long time. And so there's just not this ramp in buying that you might see in other spaces. Okay, so a couple other thoughts that came in, questions that came in. How do you see service, such as device installation, increasing adoption rates? Is the technology alone scaring some customers? So any thoughts on the need for maybe a full do-it-for-me type approach versus DIY customers?
Yeah, so we definitely recommend kind of all of the approaches, having what we call the self-install market. So that could be purchasing, a new purchase driven by the offer of a rebate. We typically facilitate that through Uplight's marketplace offering. So we are able to stack any available energy efficiency rebates, DR rebates directly in that checkout flow. So the customer is only charged for the fully rebated amount. And then we have follow-on tips for making sure those devices actually get installed. We also, of course, leverage the bring your own device pathway. As far as direct install, we're in a really interesting place right now where we have a couple of programs that are heavily leaning on direct install just to try to reach the populations where it's relevant. So working in multifamily homes where, an installer can go in and work with the building owner and install, maybe 20 devices in a day, as long as they can get permission for entry. Also programs where we're serving, maybe a population that's less likely to know how to install the device or really even have the time. So sometimes our LMI populations are less likely to want to take on the cost and the extra burden of figuring out how this thing works. But in COVID times, nobody's really going into houses. So we've seen, kind of mirroring the trends across the country. Our utilities in the South are rolling out those DI programs sooner than some of the utilities in, for example, the upper Midwest. So it's kind of changed the approach. We have seen our partners doing stronger installation videos to accompany the enrollment process. But I do think there is just always going to be a decent portion of the population that's not comfortable with installing the device, and not really comfortable with, what the program is, how do I get in there, and having somebody to walk them through that process is really valuable.
Okay, great. A couple more questions, lots of interesting questions for you today. So have you taken the step of aligning DR requirements to variable speed modulating HVAC equipment? So if you're looking for a certain percentage of reduction, applying that to variable speed equipped homes. Do you have that type of insight and capability?
So we've definitely looked at it. One nuance with these smart thermostat programs is we have different levels of control and data access depending on the brand. So to use Emerson as an example, we have basically full access to control those devices, and we can see things like, is this a multi-stage heat pump? Are we just running stage 1, stage 2? Are we avoiding aux heat, emergency heat, those sorts of things? With manufacturers like Google Nest or Ecobee, they're running their own algorithms, and so we don't have that type of insight. So all of that is to kind of say, from running a business standpoint and looking at diminishing returns, we've opted to not dig too much into variable speed, just because there are, the vast majority, we all know, Nest has something like 80% of the market share. So if we can't control 80% of the devices with that mechanism or that scheme, it's maybe not the best juice for the squeeze.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay. Perhaps our final questions here. Do you see any specific consumer engagement opportunities with increasing residential solar adoption? How would that be different than standard DR programs or other similar programs?
That's an interesting one. I think I'm going to maybe answer this more as aspirational and less as, where we are as an industry. I think the combination of solar and AMI could become really powerful to engage with customers on specific loads. So being able to, one of the things that Uplight is really strong at is developing insights based on people's data, inclusive of AMI. So if we know a home has solar, could we, advise to a customer, hey, maybe, we notice you're running your oven, run it at 3, or, do your laundry at 4 o'clock instead of at 7 o'clock when you're, right in the middle of the duck curve. I think there are a lot of opportunities both for contemporaneous information. So when you have something like a Sense or a copper meter, where you're getting that kind of live data. And then there's also additional engagement that you could do as, some of the AMI data we don't get until 24 hours or more after the fact. And sometimes it's, even in hour increments. So there's not as much insight that you can develop there, but still there are tips that you can provide, trends you can identify that I think present a great opportunity for customers. It really does get down to figuring out the best way to serve up that information, so it's not overwhelming and you're not, nitpicking at them, but just kind of providing like, hey, here's a good solar related tip.
Yeah.
What is that cadence? What is that content? What is that complexity? And really thinking about, if a customer engages in one tip, maybe they want more tips. If they don't ever engage in that, try something else. So I think that's a big part of it, whether it's solar or really any other engagement with the smart home.
Okay. Well, so I want to end on one thing that you mentioned in your presentation, which was that for certain consumers who didn't have the proper equipment to accept a smart thermostat, right, you guys instrumented or implemented some sort of energy management solution or energy efficiency type solution for those households, really meeting consumers where they are, and thinking about other segments that you can touch in the population. Can you give us a little bit more insight into what that type of energy management package looked like? Like what was included, or what was that toolkit?
Yeah, so it was an energy efficiency kit. So it was more, physical things like light bulbs, LED light bulbs and things like it wasn't an active management program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting and a nice approach to think about beyond just the exact population that you can engage with today, right? You're getting meeting people where you are, as you mentioned, and getting them thinking about energy efficiency and how they're using energy, and maybe they will be in different households as they move, or as life circumstances change, might be participants in other energy programs. So that's really great to hear. Well, thank you so much for all of your time and your insights that you shared today. We're so pleased to have you and have Uplight join us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Up next, we have an executive Q&A. My Park Associates President, Elizabeth Parks, will be having a conversation with Debbie Kimberly from Austin Energy. We'll be right back with that conversation. Welcome back. This is Elizabeth Parks, President of Parks Associates. Thank you all for joining us, and that was a fascinating conversation and presentation. So thank you for that contribution. It's really interesting looking at how consumers view control of their own devices in their home for energy consumption. Last week was certainly a busy week in Texas for utilities. It was crazy here with some customers losing power for days. And last year was a crazy year as 90% of consumers report a shift in their everyday activities. No doubt the impact of COVID has been huge and will continue to be as we adjust in new and different ways. Right now, our research is reporting that 20% of broadband households report that COVID-19 has increased their interest in a smart home solution that manages the energy use, cost, and comfort. And 15% report that their interest has increased as a result of COVID-19. I am so pleased today to have Debbie Kimberly, VP Customer Energy Solutions of Austin Energy, to join us. Austin Energy has been a founding supporter of Parks Associates Smart Energy Summit. For the past 12 years, they have participated as an advisory board contributor, as well as a sponsor of our annual event. As one of the most innovative energy providers, Austin Energy is the United States' 7th largest public utility, serving more than 500,000 customers in the Texas area. Debbie Kimberly joined Austin Energy in January of 2013 and is responsible for the Energy Solutions Group.
So I'm really pleased to bring Debbie on screen with me today. You know, last year it was in person, and certainly appreciate you joining us again today, especially after the very difficult situation that I imagine you all have been dealing with the last, 10 days or so. So, what a week. Let's just jump right in and see if we can get your perspective on what's happening with the energy markets in Texas.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I want to make sure you can hear me all right. I miss seeing you in person. It's always been such a pleasure to have the Smart Energy Summit here in Austin, and it's a good thing the timing wasn't coincident with what has been in the past, because otherwise y'all would have been in Austin last week and might still be in Austin. You know, I know this is entitled Fireside Chat, and when I saw that, I was having flashbacks, because that's exactly where the Kimberly family spent 3 days last week, huddled in front of our gas fireplace. We were snowbound. We were keeping food outdoors and cooking on our gas stove. And I just want to give a big public shout out to our crews and incident command activation that helped restore power to all of our customers over what was really a prolonged period of time. When you look at what happened last week, it is truly, truly unprecedented. And I can't begin to underscore it. In fact, I would go so far as to say it was a humanitarian crisis and really remains that way. Austin was below freezing for 144 hours, consecutive hours. That's 6 days. We had 3 ice storms, freezing rain, crystalline snow, high winds, fuel supply constraints that led to the grid operator, ERCOT, having problems in keeping supply and demand in balance. And we all know that that's essential to avoid what could ultimately be cascading outages and damage to the grid. They went from 70 megawatts down to, I think, roughly 45 megawatts in a very short period of time. And as a result of that, we weren't able to rotate outages. So we were lucky. We only lost power for 3 days. Others, as you say, lost power for 5 days. And we kept water on. We were under a boil notice, but many in town lost water because pipes froze in customers' homes, pipes froze in water mains. And so as a result, reservoirs dropped, and the city issued not only a boil notice, but there were customers experiencing not only water, but power outages. So, my takeaway from all of that, Elizabeth, is think about, and I know your other commenters mentioned this, think about resilience. And I would encourage folks that are watching to read a paper that one of my colleagues co-authored for IEEE, and it's entitled Building an Intelligent Grid for the 21st Century. My colleague's name is Tom Pierpoint. And resilience is and will be the ability to adapt and prepare for changing conditions and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. And that can be natural disasters like what we have seen recently, deliberate events, cyber, and a whole bunch of other things. And just to kind of finish that out, and you do such a great job, and it's been such a pleasure to be associated with Parks for many, many years in tracking data. In 2020, the United States suffered 22 climate events that exceeded $1 billion in costs. And I've seen estimates that this event in Texas right now is estimated to be roughly $20 billion. So $1 billion, 22 events. And the year before, in 2019, that number was 16. So the severity and frequency of these events is increasing, and resilience is important, not just at the grid level, but all the way down to the customer level. So that gives you a little bit of context. The word fireside has taken on a new meaning for me in light of the events of last week.
Well, we certainly appreciate you being here, and appreciate all of your team who has been working hard to ensure that power is back for Texans. So let's talk a little bit more about distributed energy resources. You mentioned resiliency for utilities, and certainly we are in the midst of transformation with the grid. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the key trends you're seeing that these types of resources are going to end up having an impact as a result? So resiliency, the ability to adapt and change is certainly there, but what are some of the other things that you could mention that are very specific to these new energy resources that we're focused in on?
So one of the things that has been an increased focus for Austin Energy, and I think so many other participants in the energy sector these days, is equity. And that has been front and center for Austin Energy and my folks and a whole number of other folks within Austin Energy. So I put equity as sort of number one. So for example, we have 50% of our community solar subscriptions that are allocated to our customer assistance program customers. And they get a discounted rate from day one. And I'm proud of that. We have a shared solar initiative where we're connecting multifamily properties to a single solar array, and customers get a pro rata share of that production, and the customers that live in those properties are limited income customers. We've been doing weatherization. All right, so this is not necessarily the bright, shiny objects. We've been doing weatherization for 38, almost 40 years. And we've recently extended that into multifamily properties. And here's what I think the play is for your listeners and those that are watching. In the case of Austin Energy, in our service territory, 60% of our residential customers rent, and many of them live in multifamily properties. And so we started rolling out smart thermostats in those properties, which our contractors who partner with us described as the granite countertops of energy efficiency. Property owners like having those because it's seen as an amenity. It actually increases the value of that property. And we bundle the bright, shiny object, the smart stat, the power strips, and HVAC checkups, the dessert, if you will, with the vegetables. And that's the insulation, the duct remediation, the solar screens, and all of the other things that are so essential in terms of ensuring, just like my family experienced last week and many others did, in an event like we suffered through, can customers stay warm because you've done everything you can to try to protect the thermal envelope. Clearly, we need to get around storage. I heard on a call this morning that power walls apparently are going like hotcakes. I wouldn't be surprised, but they're expensive. And so I think if we can get battery storage down, if we can get to vehicle to grid longer term, that will be helpful in terms of resilience. And I really liked what Emily just said because she talked about customer preferences. But we've found that resilience and reliability is the number one priority and has been even before this event for both our residential, our commercial, as well as our large industrial customers. But surrounding that, what they want are the 4 C's. And you've probably heard me say this before, and it hasn't changed. They want convenience. They want control. They don't want the utility controlling their devices for them. They want cost, low cost, and they want choice of plans and options. The last thing I would conclude with there, and we see it going on certainly during COVID, our focus has pivoted to be a focus on carbon reduction. We at Austin Energy have a goal to be carbon free by 2035, to increase our cumulative demand-side management resources to 1,200 megawatts starting from 2007. And of that, 220 megawatts will be demand response. And we have some very ambitious solar goals as well. So, I mean, that's really what we're seeing in our environment. And I'd be interested to see if some of your other participants are interested in those same sorts of things. So we've pivoted the dialogue to be about carbon and to do so in a way that is smart.
Well, we're certainly seeing those large corporations have sustainability initiatives, and I think clean energy is not going away. People are paying attention to that, and certainly our research is showing that consumers do care about their energy consumption. And I imagine in Texas, they really care. They probably weren't thinking much about it 2 weeks ago, and certainly is top of mind. Some of our most recent research is also showing that interest in paying for a monthly service that comes along with backup generators and or other methods of monitoring. And so we anticipate seeing that in the future as well. However, as Jennifer noted, and Emily also noted in some ways with her presentation, there's still a lack of awareness and familiarity with the value of these products. And I know Austin Energy does, such a great job in the city of Austin with really highlighting the benefits of clean energy. But maybe you can share just a little bit more about some of your marketing initiatives, how you're reaching your customers, and what some of the, some specific things that you think are grabbing their attention to then, trigger an adjustment either within joining a new program or buying, an electric vehicle or adopting that smart thermostat.
Wow, that's such a great question. And I look at the makeup of our customer base, and our residential customers as a big group, a big cohort, tend to trend towards the younger demographic. And with our residential customers, with our resis, we kind of, first of all, you want to keep your finger on the pulse of your customers, right? And you can't just use one approach, you have to use multiple approaches. So I loved the comment that Emily made about email notices. That's our customers' preferred means of communicating. Send me emails. But we also test our messaging in advance. Right now, our message is save energy for what matters, and we pivoted to that during the pandemic. And it has sort of multiple inferences, if you will. We've used panels, online panels that are dispersed throughout our service territory to gauge how effective that messaging is. And our tagline, if you will, is customer-driven, community-focused. And that's important for me because it's almost hard for me to remember this. This last year, 2020, the year that we all want to forget, marked our 125th anniversary. So our 125th birthday. Rebates and incentives are one way to get the message out. But I think what we've been successful in doing at Austin Energy is to try to do what you mentioned earlier, which is affect transformational change. And one of the ways we've done that is we serve as the advisor to the city of Austin on energy codes. And so again, don't forget the basics in terms of, eat your vegetables and you get dessert. Weatherizing is important, but then utilize new channels. So this is one we started doing. Actually, we started putting our toe in the water on this before COVID, but I'd ask the question of our marketing people, have we ever considered promoting our products and services through streaming? So I don't know about the rest of you. I've been doing a little bit more binge watching over the last year since I've been working remotely from home for the last 12 months. I don't know what your folks, your viewers and participants have as their favorite show. I can tell you what mine have been, and I'll spare you the metrics. When you're doing social media messaging, make sure you collect the metrics on those so you can gauge the effectiveness, set those targets in terms of how many click-throughs, how much time spent on a page, and make sure you're specific in your call for action. So it's one thing to talk about your brand, which we do, but make sure you have a specific call for action. Before COVID hit, and even now, leverage your partners and your media outlets. And so a couple of summers ago, we were experiencing very high heat. We had a couple of EEA1 alerts. Those are emergency alerts that ERCOT sends out. And I got a call with about 30 minutes notice from the weatherman at the NBC affiliate here in Austin, asking if I would come on air to talk about our smart thermostat program, especially for multifamily residents. And I was in my car and out the door in no time at all. So sometimes it's not just what you say, but it's what others say about you. Collect those testimonials, employ proven tactics, and not necessarily just the tactics that other energy service providers use, but others that are non-energy providers. I'll call out one customer that we serve, and if you're from Texas, you know them well, it's HEB. And they have been rock solid through the pandemic and through all of the challenges we've faced, including through the outage event that we lived through last week. And everything we can do with HEB to partner with them, and that may include what we did to facilitate feeding and getting water out to our crews. Partner with your customers. They can tell your story sometimes even more effectively than you can.
Well, very good advice for any industry you're in. And I actually read an article about HEB and all the things that they were doing with really opening up their supermarkets and telling people to please come take the food if you need it. Rather than just have the food go, be spoiled because it with no power and no way to really use it. So really interesting too that you mentioned the MDU space. We're doing a lot of research with property managers as well as builders in trying to understand how the product companies and software companies can really scale up by leveraging those environments with the distribution of lots of products at one time. And we have Felicity, who's going to be joining us from Stratus and now RealPage later this afternoon. An exciting conversation is always there with her to talk about that. But maybe you can add on just a little bit about the MDU space in terms of services and whether there are any differences in the offerings versus the single family home environment. Does that look the same, or are you approaching those categories differently?
We do approach them somewhat differently. So first of all, who's your target? Generally, in the case of your multifamily space, you're going to be targeting your property owner, and you're going to leverage your contractors who reach out to make that connection. In the case of the single family space, as we all know, and you mentioned it early on, residential consumption is up, commercial consumption has come down. We saw a huge increase in interest in do-it-yourself. Now, Debbie Kimberly, believe it or not, is the do-it-yourself person in our family. My husband, he's a wonderful man. We've been married for over 40 years. This is not his strong suit. So just with partnerships through 70 different retail outlets, whether it's Costco or Walmart and many others in between, we've actually promoted discounted point of sale discounts for, I think it's probably 185,000 products a year. So it's significant. And it ranges all the way from a window air conditioning unit to LED light bulbs and everything in between, because customers are stressed. A lot of customers are seeing incomes squeezed as a result of the pandemic. A family member may have lost their job. So realize that you've got to pivot your messaging and target very sort of laser focused your audience.
Well, that's great. I've got a question that came in from our audience that's specific about the carbon goals that Austin Energy has set. And so could you speak to some of the very specific things you're doing today, to contribute to those goals that you have?
So what we decided to do, and it's such a robust plan, and I hope that it will be a model for others. Austin Energy, obviously we're part of the ERCOT market, so we bid our generation into the ERCOT market, and then we buy from the ERCOT market. And so we have a shared interest in a coal-fired plant. It's called Fayette. We have some gas units. We have an interest in South Texas nuclear project. But what we said we would do is essentially put in place a carbon pricing mechanism at the Fayette unit. So a couple of our gas units are scheduled to be retired. One already has been retired, the second one in a year. But the Fayette project is one that we jointly own. And so what we did was to say, we are going to set a price or essentially hold back from dispatch our share of that unit. And just as a result of doing that for a partial year, not even a full year, we avoided the emission of 800,000 tons, starting in the April timeframe through the end of the calendar year, because that's what we're trying to do. We've reached out actively to dealerships on electric vehicles. We've won many awards for that in terms of working and partnering. Again, that's sort of that common word theme, partnering with dealerships to educate customers so that they can find the vehicle that's right for them, understand how that vehicle works, actually look at interactive maps if they're in a dealership. So we're doing those sorts of things. But the real one for us is to be carbon free by 2035. And that's not very far off. but to do so in a way that doesn't increase costs for our customers.
Well, that's great to hear, and certainly understand that, you know, making some small and big changes sort of everywhere, you're going to get this very, very big impact. And I think that's where, you know, the focus on the consumer at home, even if you look at the appliances and the TVs and all the manufacturers who are working to reduce energy consumption with those devices, all of that adds up. And then you add in demand response programs. You have individual homes that are then neighborhoods of savings, and really, you know, we'll see that impact on the grid. We do have another question from our audience. So here it goes. V2G seems to be a low-hanging fruit to provide resiliency. Do you have any push towards car OEMs to open their battery access?
It's a great question. We completed a project in partnership with the Department of Energy just last year. It was the SHINE project. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. And part of that was a demonstration of V2G parking at Pecan Street. It's a board on which I serve. We partnered with them for many years because I do think that will be increasingly of interest, because your point is well taken. But for a few parts of the United States, I believe Hawaii has done partnerships with Nissan to enable V2G charging. I think you will see the industry pushing more in that direction, especially in light of events. And it wasn't just Texas, mind you. I mean, there were other parts of the United States that suffered through this absolutely horrific storm. And so we do maintain good partnerships, as well as through industry associations, and such as the Electric Power Research Institute, that has a very, very active role in this space.
Well, that's great. And yeah, certainly partnerships, I think, are going to help drive adoption of connected devices in the home, because there's this integration that has to occur so that you can get that experience for the consumer. And certainly our research has shown over the many years we've been studying these categories that it really is all about the experience. And if you don't have the experience, you probably don't have your buyer. So, you know, there's still lots of work for the industry to do, but Austin Energy has just played such an amazing role in, you know, putting forth an understanding of energy efficiency, as well as, you know, innovative programs. So we just have maybe a couple minutes left, so I want to see if you can give me your vision for the next 3 to 5 years, Debbie, and what you see is happening as we look at the transformation of the grid.
So 3 to 5 years, I am retiring next Friday, but I'll project a vision beyond that. Okay. Number one, it's the theme that even before what we've dealt with, resilience. You need cost-effective battery storage. I think you do need to be able to enable EV discharge. And there's another aspect to that I didn't note, which is we do have a pilot that we've been running where we enable, number one, higher rebates for level 2 charging stations that are Wi-Fi enabled, so that we can shift that load if need be, because we are seeing an increase in penetration in our market. So don't forget about the EV load, and don't forget about the resilience impact if you have a number of EVs within a certain part of your service territory, within a neighborhood, that are all charging at the same time and not allowing a transformer to cool down, then that can cause a problem. So I think everybody's looking at means by which you can have increased resilience, backup power. But in order to be able to call those events, in order to be able to even, like I said, sort of laser focus on certain areas, because we had certain areas that had those prolonged outages that you mentioned, Elizabeth, where they went beyond a day, or even the 3-day outage that we had that went even longer than that. You need to be able to have a robust DERMS platform, Distributed Energy Resource Management Program, and you need to have incentives for customers to participate. And we know our customers prefer bill credits as opposed to a check. So they want to be able to see it. The immediacy is important to them. So instead of opting out of those events, because now we've made it a lot easier to opt out of those events, what can you do to incentivize them to stay in those events, not just our residential customers, but also our commercial and industrial customers? And then the third thing, and this was a real need we saw last week, and need for real-time information via multiple channels. And if that was one of the learnings for me, at least from this most recent event, is I wanted to be able to pull up an outage map and know that it was accurate and that it was being refreshed and it was accurate on a real-time basis. So if my house is without power, but the outage map shows that I have power, that's not a good customer experience, right? So I think, we need to get better at doing those sorts of things, and keeping our customers informed, whether it's doing things via this little thing that almost everybody has, or other tools. I think those are the things that we need to do more of in the future, and I see as being robust opportunities. So obviously, looking at batteries, looking at having the right platforms, and then clearly communicating on more of a real-time basis. Does the utility know I'm without power? I should know that.
Well, certainly, there are lots of issues to address, and I think the circumstances that we all went through last week will continue to be, kind of picked through to figure out, hopefully not a lot of finger pointing and more looking at future solutions. And so we certainly appreciate you being here, Debbie. I wish I was with you in person right now and that we were in Austin. However, it's great to have you joining us. And again, want to thank you for your years of support and specifically to you personally for the support of Parks Associates research as well as our events. So thanks for being here. And that's going to conclude our spotlight interview with Debbie today. And we are going to move on here to our next session that Jennifer Kent will be moderating. So if you hold on with us for just a minute, we'll be right back. Thanks for joining us.
Great. So thank you very much, Elizabeth and Debbie, for that great conversation. We're moving now into our full interactive panel discussion. I'm so excited to invite really leaders from across the industry to tease out the implications of some of these trends we've been talking about further. I'm Jennifer Kent, VP of Research at Parks Associates, so pleased to be moderating this session. So let me start by bringing in our speakers. I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your organization and your role at your organization. And I'll start with Travis Allen, who's the VP of Public Affairs and General Counsel for Flow at Energy. Hi, Travis.
Hi. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'm actually so excited to hear what my other panelists have to say. I'm Travis Allen. I'm with one of the largest EV charging networks in North America, which is called Flow. We have a whole range of EV charging solutions from residential, networked residential stations all the way up to the full fast charging experience. And there's a slide on there. We also are a major manufacturer of the solutions, the smart charging which stations which we make here in North America. So we've done quite a bit of charging over our day, over 500,000 charging events, and we estimate around 5.5 gigawatts of electricity transferred. We've sold 35,000 stations and participate in demand response programs and other sort of consumer-driven EV charging programs with utilities across North America. So very excited to be here today.
Great, thank you for joining us. And we've had quite a few questions come in already related to vehicle grid integration and vehicle to grid. And so I'm excited to hear your insights. Next, we have Brian Farhi, who's the head of Energy Services Partnerships with Google Nest. Hi, Brian.
Hi, thanks for having us, Jennifer. And yes, Brian Farhi, I lead Energy Services Partnerships and deregulated energy partnerships at Nest/Google. And we are really focused on trying to help our partners in a variety of different ways with different types of solutions related to thermostat technology today, but really just more broadly in the energy space. And looking at different ways of being able to deploy that. So, of course, demand response is a very important initiative that Google's been involved with for quite a while, about 8 years now. And we work through a variety of DERMs to be able to help support our partners on that front. But we also are working with a number of marketplace providers, like our friends over at Uplight, to be able to help get customers, get technology into the customer's hands, but also to be able to get those devices then pre-enrolled into these demand response programs to be able to make it easier for them to participate and be able to be part of the solution. And then we're also looking at a number of other ways of being able to collaborate and really be able to help ensure that whatever the needs are of a utility or an energy provider, that we're there to be able to support them both on the hardware and the services side.
Wonderful, thank you. Great to have the Google Nest perspective here today. And next we have Jonathan Hull, who's the product marketing manager at Ecobee Energy. Hi, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. Good morning or afternoon to everyone, depending where you're sitting. My name is John Hull. I'm the product marketing manager for Energy Channel at Ecobee. I've been in the energy industry my entire career, actually spending time at a utility, a consultancy, a retail energy provider. So I've jumped around and touched a little bit of everything. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about the energy industry more broadly. Ecobee, we are a smart home products and services manufacturer, most well known for inventing the smart thermostat. Our mission is to improve everyday life while creating a more sustainable world for our customers. And certainly the smart home and customer engagement is a really key on that mission. So, that's why we're so excited to come today. I sit on what we call our energy team, which focuses on delivering Ecobee's products and solutions into the utility channel by bringing together our experience in creating awesome customer experiences and merging customer demands with the need of our utility, whether that be energy efficiency programs, demand response programs, pricing programs, income qualified programs, what have you. Over the last few years, we've really been focused on bringing to market and into our partner program called Eco Plus, which is our latest innovation in thermostat management that brings together AI machine learning to deliver more savings for our customers through price optimization, humidity optimization, better occupancy detection, and really facilitating participation in our partner program. So I'm really excited again to be here today and looking forward to that.
Great, thanks, John. And at Parks, when we talk about kind of the history of the smart thermostat market, of course, we date it back to the Ecobee launch, which is now over 10 years ago. Is that right? So we're a decade into the smart thermostat market.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so next we also have Paul Williams, who's the GM Product Management and Growth for GE Lighting, which is now a Savant company. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Jennifer, thank you. It's always a treat to attend these Parks Associates events. I always find that they're very informational, get a lot of great content. You guys do just a great job. So pleasure to be here, pleasure to be talking to everybody today, and looking forward to our panel discussion. So as Jennifer mentioned, GE Lighting, it's a 140 40-year-old company, but just this last year in 2020, with all the crazy stuff going on in the year, on top of that, GE Lighting was acquired by Savant. So we're now a Savant company. My name is Paul Williams, and I head up product management for the organization. And I think I'm going through my 18th year being in the smart home. So I've been in at it for a long time. I've seen the changes and the growth and the ebbs and flows of the smart home. It's been an interesting and fun career path. Where we're focused is really on, as you think about GE Lighting, this rich experience of bringing lighting to consumers, but also now with Savant and then Race Point Energy, which is also a Savant-owned company, bringing those three entities together from the technology really puts us in a unique spot. It puts us in a place where we are able to use the technology in the home to inform a consumer about usage and to understand where it's being used, but also to then be able to get information from demand response to make things happen for the consumer, to be able to provide them suggestions for things that need to change so that we can allow them to more intelligently decide how energy is used in their home and how it then is changed through the day based on what's happening from either the usage itself or through demand response. So we are excited about the future, excited about where we're heading, and excited to be here.
Great, thank you, Paul, and again, thank you all of you for joining me today. So really this session is meant to talk about the significant changes that we've seen over the past year and what that means for the challenges ahead of you, the opportunities that are on the table, and what needs to be done. So I would love to start off by getting your perspectives on the impact of the past year, COVID-19 pandemic, the changes in consumers' lives, and what that's really meant for the end users that you serve, as well as perhaps your own businesses and your own business strategy. And we can start with Brian here.
Sure, thanks. And yeah, it's been an interesting year, right? I think that the biggest thing that we've actually noticed is that there were a number of utilities that decided to actually try to do something on behalf of the customers and generate these helpfulness campaigns. And what that means is they've redeployed resources to efficiency and to demand response programs and said, look, there are a lot of people that are stuck at home. There are a lot of people that are unable to either pay their bills because they've lost their jobs or whatever else. Let's try to be more helpful, and let's try to be able to provide more incentives for customers to do what we really wanted them to do in the first place, but now we're going to actually put even more shoulder behind it. So we've seen programs like Consumers Energy, for example, where they've basically made a commitment to be able to install 100,000 smart thermostats within a year, just to be able to make sure that their customers are not just taking advantage of this technology, but getting those devices enrolled in their MISO program, so that way they can actually leverage them when things like what happened in Texas last week happen in Michigan as well.
Mm-hmm. Let me actually follow up on a point you made there. So in those helpfulness campaigns, actually, they are relating to their customers in a new way. One data point that I hadn't shared earlier is that we have asked consumers how they think various service providers to the home have performed during COVID-19. And over 40% are giving their energy providers very good or excellent ratings, which is I think, pretty positive. So are you surprised by that? Or are you seeing kind of the same reaction to this helpfulness?
No, we're seeing that, and certainly, Consumers is a shining star example, but we're seeing that around the country in the Northeast with like National Grid and Evergy. We've seen it elsewhere as well, and I think that actually you're going to see more of that in 2021, because I think that first of all, there's very few utilities want to be the first, right? And very understandably so. So there's going to be a lot of that, but frankly, we're not out of the woods economically, right? There's a lot of people that are still hurting, and there's a lot of need on the grid, and if anything, over the last week, we've just seen even more reason to invest heavily in demand side management.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, same question to you, John. What major impacts have you seen on consumer energy consumption or engagement with your products and your services over the past year, and how have things changed for your business?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny because just about this time last year, we were sitting down to do some corporate planning, and not sure if anybody else did corporate planning at the start of COVID, but trying to do sales forecasts was an exercise in this for the most part. We on our side said, hey, there's no way that our demand response programs, direct install programs are going to get a lot of traction. No contractors are going to go into people's homes. People are going to tighten their belts because of the economic impacts that they were seeing. And what we've seen is that actually hasn't really materialized, hasn't been the case. So what we saw is actually the market innovating really fast. So for instance, on direct install programs, there's some implementers that moved to do virtual audits and virtual assistance to help people do self-installs instead. And then there are regions that didn't lock down or close down as much as others. So contractors were still going to those homes and doing those installations. On a sort of retail and direct-to-consumer side, we've seen both retailers obviously push things online, and then utilities either launching new online marketplaces or investing in their marketplaces. And I think Brian and Emily talked about what we call dual enrollment or stacked rebates, where a customer at the point of sale gets their energy efficiency and demand response rebate at the same time, brings it together, and oftentimes they can bring the product cost nearly to free or free something. That really tends to drive volume in utility territory. So it's interesting, the data that you showed that showed the broader market experiencing a bit of a dip, but I think for us at Ecobee, that hasn't been the case. Things have been surprisingly good. And I think we've seen other trends that I think have been driven by sort of a bifurcation of the impacts of COVID. Right? I think COVID hasn't impacted everybody economically. Right? A bit of two segments of the population, ones which have been really deeply impacted, and some that, white collar workers especially, were able to stay home and continue working. And those were folks that tend to own their home and had cash on hand. And we saw the home renovation market just go through the roof. Home Depot, the lumber yards, and all those companies were, out of materials and out of product. And smart thermostats and other smart home products fit somewhat into that category. So we saw customers, because they were in their homes so much, wanting to invest in their home and put products in there. On the other side is, once the product's on the wall, what's the experience like? Right? Do customers really interact with the thermostat, in our case, in the same way that they would have otherwise? And the answer is, to a degree, yes and no. So some, folks are expect a set it and forget it type of experience still, even though they're home more. So we've really focused on innovating our algorithm to make sure that they can continue to deliver savings, both energy savings, cost savings, even though they're home, right? And one would think that that's counterintuitive, but there's still lots that can be done to deliver savings to customers in their home, whether it's optimizing around time of use rate, customer has, getting them into an energy program that they rebate or happy. So there's still lots to be done there. And in our case, with Eco Plus, we ran a national M&V study that showed even if people were home, or even when people were home, that much more, we still delivered 5% incremental savings that we had before, which was awesome. The smart home products are able to deliver even when folks are home, which is a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so a couple of interesting things you mentioned there. We're definitely also seeing a lot of people reporting that they're renovating their homes, change their layout. Their home layout wasn't working for being home, and really the home as the hub for all of life all the time. So that's interesting to speak to. And also in the variety of verticals we cover, including, let's say, connected health and telehealth, people are being driven to look for new solutions in various aspects of their life and inform themselves about what opportunities and technologies are out there. And so do you feel like self-driven consumer awareness of demand response programs and energy efficient type devices has gone up because consumers are more incentivized than ever to bring down that energy bill because they're at home more than ever, and so there's some of that behavior happening?
Sure, I can take a stab at this one. I think a few things are happening. I've been in the industry for a couple handfuls of years, and I think the marketing campaigns and the way in which customers are being engaged by utility partners, it continues to improve, right? And not just the messaging, but also the tooling and the channels. So I use the term meeting customers where they're at very frequently, and you can see, the multi-channel approaches to reaching out to customers, I think are having impacts, and then marry that technology that's meant to reduce friction or bring customers into the programs more easily. I think we're seeing not just greater awareness, but therefore greater participation.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Well, so beyond COVID-19 specifically, of course, there's wider trends that are happening. I'd love to hear from you, Travis, as well, especially when you think about the auto market and the trends that have changes in transportation and commutes that have happened this year. Can you speak about your experience this year, but also what other major trends are you paying attention to, whether it be the new administration that's come in and whether funding sources, are shaking up the market, or larger, we've talked a lot about the issues in Texas this past year and grid stability issues. What are you really focused on at your organization?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, the macro trends are the biggest one, of course, is the likely acceleration of adoption of electrified transportation across the light, medium, and heavy duty sectors in the United States, particularly in light of the change in administration. And so we're starting to see the kinds of interest outside of sort of the traditional homes of vehicle electrification, like California, Quebec, British Columbia, into other states and provinces that have sort of realized that this is likely happening, and it's likely not something that's going to stop. So that's starting to see interest in fleets, starting to see interest amongst a broader subset of consumers than just the very early adopters, and also looking at ways to make sure that infrastructure is deployed both for public residential, public consumer charging, but also in the home. And as I mentioned in my intro, we're also seeing, increased interest by utilities in trying to understand how electric vehicle charging is working, not at sort of a very general high level, but with regard to their specific region. If they're, depending on when their peak is, depending on what the localized grid constraints, distribution grid constraints may be. What we've seen, which is very predictable, is that during this period, consumers have stopped having as many charging sessions at home. So I asked our team to pull the data on all of our connected residential charging stations across North America, and quite predictably, consumers are driving less, and so they need fewer actual charges. It hasn't impacted really how much energy is transferred, which I found kind of interesting. If you look at it on an average basis, they're still roughly taking the same amount of energy overall. And then there's been a very strong drop, like about 40% in the amount of time that they're charging. So they may be plugged in for longer periods of time, actually, but the actual active charging portion has reduced during COVID-19 quite significantly. So, these are changes that certainly we're paying attention to. The flip side, if we look at our stations deployed in Los Angeles, which are curbside charging stations, in that case, the city decided to make those stations free for a period of time to support Angelinos during COVID. And they actually saw an increase in use, possibly because there was fewer competition for parking spots, or possibly because, people, I guess, were really enjoying the free charging, and so they were really incentivized to move, which is great if you're interested in consumer incentives and behavioral economics. So we've seen some things that are a bit surprising, and then we've seen other things that really line up with where we think the industry is going overall, which is dramatically higher electrification, more consumer awareness that there might be ways to defray their electricity costs by participating in demand response and data sharing programs. And I think as those become more commonplace, and as communication starts to get better, we're expecting to see an increase in those types of programs as well.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit to the EV market generally? So I know it's early to look back at all the numbers that have come in from 2020. From what I've seen, EV still had a generally okay year, maybe even really strong internationally. I think it was Emily who mentioned with shorter commutes or no commutes, a lot of that range anxiety goes away. And so do you see a change in consumers' acceptedness and openness to electric vehicles coming out of this experience?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing, so there's the data on that particular point can be a bit tricky. And the reason is because not all regions have the same access to makes and models of EVs. And so in some regions where you'd think we would have had even better adoption, we didn't. And it likely was because of a lack of vehicle availability. In other areas where automakers made a real effort to get makes and models there, because I guess they assumed that they were further along the consumer adoption curve, specifically in Northern Europe, we just saw an incredible year. And I think that that is probably where the rest of the regions are likely to end up in the next 3 to 5 years. And certainly not what people were expecting. I mean, even if I think back to, government advocacy we were doing at the beginning of COVID, we were saying, look, this is probably really going to hurt our sales numbers. And in some regions, it really did not. And so I think that people are starting to get more comfortable that this is happening, this is for real. And as we get more makes and models, particularly in that middle range, so you've got your really expensive EVs, and then you've got, some of them on the lower end. When we fill in that gap and we have more vehicles that are sort of appropriate for middle class consumers, when we have more of a robust used market, which is really what brings in sort of another big portion of the population who tend not to buy new vehicles anyway, this is going to, of course, lead to significant increase in adoption.
Well, let me actually follow up on this with Brian. If you think from Google Nest perspective, as Google obviously has its hands across the connected home, does the electrification of the vehicle fleet and more charging at home, how does that play into kind of Google's perspective of the world? Or are there other macro trends that you like to speak to that are really, pushing your strategy and your business decision making?
Sure. I think it's interesting. I think that there's a lot of different ways that Google is obviously involved, and I think that many of you have probably read announcements on things like what we were doing with Ford, and likewise we're doing a lot on the geo side, on the map side, with trying to ensure that people have the right information to be able to access charging stations wherever they need them. So our focus is really on just the general ecosystem on that front, but we obviously are very strongly supportive of the move to electrification and EVs, and it's something that we feel like is kind of a necessity to get us to where we want to be from a climate goal perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one thing I don't want to pass by too much before we move on is, we did just have this historic power outage in the South, right? Does this expose, the vulnerabilities of electrification of the grid? Do we have any takes, Jonathan, perhaps to you, about how you're thinking about grid instability and where Ecobee perhaps plays in that larger conversation?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think again, the events we saw last few weeks were pretty, some news articles saying it was like a 1 in 100 year event, and those are all kind of rather extremely important. But I think if we come down from 1 in 100 years to something a little more frequent, we can start to think about the role that the play in the new world, right? The world that Travis is describing with electrification and decarbonization and significant share of renewables on the grid. And in my opinion, it's going to be a role where the demand side the active role in balance. In the past, the demand side, especially residential customers, were really sort of these resources that would be used 5 to 10 times a year, right? Really hot days, the really cold days, and the rest of the year. But now we're seeing with the move towards pricing programs, the innovation on product services, and as Debbie mentioned, innovation in parts. We're able to start moving towards, either localized shorter events, optimization, smart homes to play, to become an active and starts to participate in the grid and balancing it, not by the year, but probably on by the minute or by the hour. And I think once we start to think about stability problems with a high percent of renewable generation on the grid, we have these classes broadly that utilities or wholesale market can do for the system, either provide daily stability, provide stability in these more exceptional events, be both cost reduction for consumers for the long term, but also greater protection.
So you were coming in and out a little bit on the audio, but I'm going to say back what I think you said and tell me if I'm on. So you were saying, of course, this is like a once in 100-year event or something, and you've got to be planning for the highs and lows, and it's very difficult to do. But you expect that over time we'll be able to have even more, localized insight, a very high insight that'll help to control things, as well as the prospects of bringing the distributed energy resources onto the grid to be able to stabilize and to stabilize the grid and contribute to stabilization as opposed to just expose the vulnerability perhaps of the grid. Is that somewhat where you're going?
That's right. I hope you can hear me okay now. Lean in more. There we go. Yeah, exactly. And I think what's neat is that future isn't actually that far away. We have partners that already do it today, and it's really about scaling those systems, and making it broadly available to both utility systems, but also to consumers throughout.
Well, so let me bring Paul into the conversation here as well. So, especially I think from the lighting point of view, right? I mean, you're not just energy play, right? Of course, there's a wider smart home and home experience, and even kind of a delight entertainment experience when you think about lighting. Can you talk about how the smart home energy management play has shifted at all for you this year? Are there different challenges or opportunities from your perspective?
Yeah, it's been a definitely an interesting year. Much like Jonathan, we when this thing started, we sat down and had our war room what if scenarios, and some of them were pretty dire. Thankfully, it didn't work out that way. Like Jonathan and his business, we actually had a really, really good year. And one of the interesting things that I think the reason for that, and this kind of points to these changes in behavior, is that one of the things that Elizabeth mentioned early on was that we're in this kind of chasm right now between early adopters and mass adoption. Mm-hmm. And the thing that drives that is also another thing that Elizabeth said was all about experiences. And with people staying home, what we found is that people needed to start to understand that lighting plays such an important part of how you learn, how attentive you are, how you're able to get to sleep patterns. And so people discovered circadian lighting like in masses, like over this experience. They also understood that same lighting that I had in the kitchen for the last 10 years was not going to be the same lighting I needed now that it's not only used for a kitchen and for a place that I eat, but it's also my office, and it's also my kids' education space, and it's also the place where we're having family activities. And suddenly the lighting needed to change to work around that consumer's behavior. And that, interestingly enough, we believe has become a precursor to bringing people into smart home. And once they're into smart home, then they start to understand the nuances of other parts of that, which energy is a big part of. And that's the part that we are confident they're starting to find their way into. We're seeing the energy companies enter into that, utilities enter in that by promoting the fact that, hey, we'll give you rebates on smart thermostats. It's in a way for you to be able to control that. The shift will be interesting to see what happens in consumer behavior is when we get in a post-COVID world. I think that there are some that argue, and we see a lot of different information, I'm sure you are at Parks, about what post-COVID world looks like. Is it like it is now? Does it shift 100% back across the spectrum and everybody's back to regular working hours, regular working days, regular working offices? We probably, I think most of us, would think it's probably somewhere in between there. I think that there's some benefits we found on both sides of that equation that people like. The interesting part will be to see now when you're in your home, and you can make an argument that yes, energy conservation with your HVAC system, single largest contributor of energy usage in a home, that when you're in your home, it's going to be more focused on comfort. And that's just the reality of people living in their home. When they move outside of their home, it gets to be more energy conscious. And we're confident with these products in place that we'll see that fundamental shift in consumer behavior, that it's not just about the creature feature functions of it and the ability to be able to control these things, but then the energy conservation part of that will step in. We've got to give consumers a reason to want to make those changes in their lives. And so that's the providing the data part of it. I don't know if I adjust my thermostat by 4 degrees, how much am I really saving? What am I really going to get out of that? And also, as Jonathan mentioned, we're in a set it kind of and forget it world for most part. If you talk to consumers, how do we help them make those conscious decisions for them? And that's where I think we're heading. So that's the kind of things we're seeing, and that certainly a big change this year.
Yeah, so a few thoughts on that. I mean, first of all, Park Associates data does certainly support your contention that once you have one smart home device, your interest and intention to buy something else goes up dramatically, right? Because you see kind of the value of what connected devices can bring. You see more possibilities. Secondly, just being home more often, I've burned through so many light bulbs. I've never changed so many light bulbs in my house in my life. So I've definitely been in the lighting market myself this year. So are you saying that, have you seen changes in reasons consumers are buying smart lighting this year, that there is an energy efficiency element to it? Or like you said, it's actually more maybe lifestyle patterns. I need better lighting because I'm on Zoom calls all the time, or I need to sleep better. And so it's more health and wellness related, right? How have you seen drivers for smart lighting change this year?
Yeah, that's an interesting one as well. To your point, in changing more light bulbs. The reason people are changing more light bulbs, interestingly enough, is there were so many consumers who had not made the leap to LED lighting. There was a ton of consumers are still running halogens and even incandescent bulbs out there. In a lot of states, you can't even buy them anymore. But there were still people that were using that type of lighting. And after the second bulb change, because now you're using that thing so frequently, they're like, man, there has to be a better way for me to be able to do this. And they're starting to find their way into LED. And as we know, that dramatic shift in energy usage between incandescent and halogen to LED is dramatic. In fact, so much so that LED lighting is a very small fraction of your total energy consumption if you've converted over to LED lighting. And I think that part of the problem was we had folks that came into LED early, and LED lighting was ugly earlier. If you were an early adopter of LED lighting, you had really blue light. It was really bright. It was annoying. It would give you headaches. Light that came a long way, and that changed. People are finally starting to see that. And what we saw on the shelf and on the retail shelf was the consumer making that leap from that incandescent halogen world of an era gone by into the new world of LED lighting. And then when they put those things in, you get really long life. I mean, you get things like 15 years of life out of a bulb, so you're not changing it all the time. And so the great part about that was that shift, and that is a great energy consumption shift that's happening, and it's because of necessity of having us use those lights more frequently. When I use a light and an incandescent and it goes on once a day for a couple of hours, I can use it for a very long time. But now that it's on all day long, every day, it burns out quickly if it's a halogen or incandescent. So that's a big shift in energy usage. And to your point, the great part about that, it becomes this on-ramp, because once you get one, and the vast majority of those we hope are controllable LED bulbs, not just LED bulbs, smart LED bulbs. Once you get that, you start to get your way in, your pathway into the smart home.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to kick the same question really more about the smart home opportunity. Has the opportunity changed at all for device manufacturers, for utilities and energy providers? To Brian here, what are your thoughts on how the opportunities and perhaps in partnerships or other energy services has changed when you think about the larger smart home ecosystem?
It's a great question. I think that, well, first of all, what we've really not just noticed, but we've really acted upon is just a general change in terms of our go-to-market strategy. We had formerly been working very directly with utilities, and we actually moved to working exclusively through DERMs and other energy services providers, because we realized that, as great as it is to have a smart thermostat DR program with a OEM, that people want to work with Ecobee, people want to work with Honeywell, people want to work with not just us, but they want to work with other technologies as well, right? So we want to make sure that we're helping utilities get the most out of those programs. I think when we think about the way that the rest of the ecosystem is evolving, I think one of the other important changes is just, I think that there's been increasing demands on some of the smarter loads and the more relevant loads in a home. So you start talking about whether it's energy storage, EV charging, smart thermostats, what have you, that I think people are getting more sophisticated in their dispatch strategies around that, and trying to combine these different technologies in different ways to be able to create the load profile that they're actually looking for. And as a result of that, we at Google, what we're doing is actually adding some additional capabilities to our DR dispatch in 2021. So that way there is a lot more flexibility going forward, and it can be used more as a flexible resource rather than just a hit the button and just hope that it does what we think it's going to do.
Yeah, can you speak to any of those? You mentioned new features kind of coming out in 2021. Are you ready to talk about any of those or in more detail?
For you, Jen, for sure, yeah. So one of the things that we'll be doing is we're going to be offering faster dispatch. So a lot of these programs, a lot of utilities, what we're seeing are using the capacity internally, and they can do day ahead planning, and it's a resource that they can just kind of know that they're going to need. But there are many others that are actually looking at how do they actually take advantage of the wholesale markets, right? How do they do economic dispatch in certain cases as well, or use this as part of their resource planning? And we're starting to see the shift of demand response and load management, not just being something that's strictly in the DSM budget in the small kind of like pilot-y phase of like, let's do 10 or 20 or 30 megawatts, but organizations that are talking about doing hundreds of megawatts of DR load. And to do that, you need more capabilities, like whether it's faster dispatch, better reporting, better forecasting abilities. And we're offering our DERMS providers better tools going forward to be able to enable them to essentially allow this to be part of a virtual power plant.
Interesting. Great. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to playing with those features. So let me draw the audience's attention to, we do have a poll in the poll tab. So there's 3 tabs. There's a chat tab, a Q&A tab, and a poll tab. And I'll be coming to those that question and those results shortly. So if you haven't had a chance to answer that poll, please do. And the question is essentially, what is the top barrier to greater consumer engagement with home energy management solutions? And this is something I touched on when this full session first began, about for demand response programs or for just uptake of smart thermostats. In general, there is sometimes a difficulty in getting beyond the early adopter and getting folks' attention. So I'd love to understand how organizationally you think about onboarding consumers, onboarding end users to your products and your services, and then keeping them engaged and engaging with them. So John, if we could go to you for that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one we spent a lot of time thinking about over the last few years. Not just how we onboard customers onto our products, but bring them together with our partner programs, right? If we look at some of the older means of enrolling customers into programs, there was a lot of steps and a lot of what Silicon Valley likes to call friction. Our work's really been in reducing that friction, making the experience participating in these programs as seamless as possible, either through the point of checkout or point of sale, as we mentioned earlier, or for those customers that may have bought our products or services at retail or through a contractor, making it part of the default experience. So we're getting close to having the program enrollment experience being available at the point of install for product. So the customers, during the installation process, are presented with the opportunity to enroll in the utility program, which isn't that great? You just paid $150, $250 for the products, and one of the first screens you see is, do you want $75, $125 back? So that's a great way of getting people in, which is get them while they're paying attention, while they set aside time. Because if they're installing their own thermostat, they know it's not just a 1 hour or a 10-minute task. It's probably an hour or so, and ask them to do the least possible. We've seen some pretty strong data supporting, like when you ask customers, for example, for their utility account number, enrollment rates drop significantly. Where if you just use the basic information you may have on file, like an email address or name and address, usually that's enough to verify that the customer is part of the utility territory. So just those like seemingly simple, they're complex IT problems in the back end, but those simple steps in reducing friction for customers have seen like drastic increases in enrollment rates on our side. And then on the other side, I'd say it's back to that slide you showed earlier, Jennifer. I wish I had it and I could get up, but she talked about the loss of control. Right? We took some steps last year with EcoFlow to change our DR algorithms to be personalized customers. The pre-cooling and the setbacks would respect a customer setting to represent their comfort threshold. And that was a change, certainly a change. And we thank a lot of our utility partners for coming with us on the change. The idea is if we can eliminate that fear of loss of control, fear that they'll be uncomfortable in these programs, then we're likely to see a lot more participation. Folks know that they're not going to lose control of the thermostat. They're not going to have a bad experience in warm days or cold days, and ideally it will be seamless. They won't even notice it. Right? That's our ultimate goal, is to have as many people as possible, ideally 100% of our customers participating, and never notice that there's an event happening in the background to shed load or consume load. That's really our approach in terms of engaging customers in the program today, and it's working well so far. But it's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, some good points there as far as onboarding. I mean, which one of us knows our energy account number, right? It would definitely take some work for me to go find that, right? Do I even get paper bills or e-bills? I'd have to figure that out. Well, so I'd love to hear the same perspective from the EV side. So are EV customers different? Is engaging with them different? Do they respond differently to utility programs and engaging with charging infrastructure, their applications, right? Travis, what perspective do you have on engaging users of EVs?
Yeah, well, I found that such an interesting description of kind of where the smart thermostat industry is, because I would say in the EV industry, we're still a little further back. And that's because, we're still trying to get consumers comfortable with the idea that the gas station is in their house. And hopefully in most cases, and helping them understand why, for example, choosing a smart charging station, which costs a little bit more money, is better for them in the long term and for their community than buying the cheapest, non-networked charging station that doesn't allow for participation in these kinds of programs. And so what we found at Flow is like we care about user experience a lot, and we care about reliability. So and that is kind of like cross-cuts all of our different segments. But the reason for that is because we believe that we will only get to widespread EV adoption if it's something that normal people can do, and if their neighbors say hey, I bought an EV and it's actually working really well. I haven't really noticed other than that I don't go to the gas station anymore or something like that. And so that's why having reliability really matters, and that matters also for residential charging stations, especially if your station is outside. It's important that it's robust and doesn't break. And then we try to be really generous with our time when people call in with questions. So we're not at the phase where you're wishing that customers don't call in. I would say most of our customer support people really like it, because they often get to explain to people how to use their EVs or how to use a charging station. And so part of being realistic about where we are in the industry is knowing what works right now and what doesn't, so that we can make sure to meet consumers where they're at. And so I'd say, being really generous with time and walking people through stuff really matters. And then also for our utility partners, I mean, many of them are still just getting used to the EV load patterns and how those can fluctuate seasonally and during the day and with many other factors. And so many right now are focusing on getting the data through APIs even. They're not even using OpenADR yet, but eventually they'll get there. But that's still really important work that has to be done. And so I see that as really important foundational work.
Well, the results of our poll have come in. The top barrier to greater consumer engagement with home energy management solutions, the #1 response was 54% said lack of compelling value proposition, followed by 25% who said low consumer awareness, And after that, 14% fragmented ecosystem. Nobody picked high product pricing. Now, if you're talking about, of course, demand response programs that perhaps doesn't apply to the program itself, that you might argue that the incentive's not high enough to make the participation worthwhile. Usually at parks, we see there's kind of a three-headed monster to get products better adopted, and it is awareness, familiarity. You got to know the thing exists, right, and understand it, and then that it's valuable to your lifestyle, that you can afford it, right? So I'd love to see, Paul, if you have any thoughts on the results of the poll here, if that's what you see in the smart lighting space as well.
Yeah, before you mentioned that, as I was preparing my thoughts, you were coming around to me. I would say the first thing is we talk about engagement, bringing people into this environment. It's education. It's been the age-old problem with smart homes since day one. Is what is the art of the possible? And if I can't tell you as a consumer what the art of the possible is and explain an experience, because I can go, hey, I've got a smart thermostat or I've got a smart bulb, and you go, well, that's fantastic. What does that do for me? What do I get out of that? What is it going to do for me? And even with rebate programs that are out there, because I see it, and we participate really heavily in rebate programs with utilities for getting lighting and smart lighting into homes. But even with that, it's not enough. And so the thing that we're engaged in is trying to educate consumers about that experience, but it's a really expensive and hard proposition, because now it's at the very top of, if you've ever seen that marketing funnel, it's all about awareness at the top of that funnel. It's really expensive. And so we're trying to find the best ways through social media, through online content, through ways to be able to educate a consumer about what is the experience that you're going to get. And then the products and the services and the utility participation become the means to an end. And that means to an end is I'm going to deliver you this experience. And that experience could be, it's energy savings. I'm going to help you be more efficient in what you're doing. And it's going to be easy, because what we're going to do is we're going to put this smart thermostat, this smart lighting, and these things in your home. And that's what's going to deliver that experience. Or it's about, I want the best possible experience. I want to be comfortable when I get home, but I also want to save money. Well, we can do that too. We can make sure that thermostat comes on the right temperature so that when you're home, it's right where you want to be. The recovery time is taken into account so that I know you're going to be home at 5. I've already started heating up or cooling the house so that when you get there at 5, it's ready to go for you. And we've got to be able to communicate that effectively. And that's the hard part. I wish there was an easy way for us to just wave magic wand and say, all consumers, here's the great experience, and everybody wants to participate. Because then I would see that mass adoption rate, we talked about hockey sticks, would be a hockey stick, because that is in my mind, and it always has been, that's the top barrier from preventing us from getting to that real kind of tipping point. It's just going to take concerted effort. I applaud the companies that are on the panel with me as well. I see the marketing they're doing. Combined with the marketing that we're doing to try to get the message out there. I think we've got to continue to do that. I think we've got to have utilities and others that have maybe bigger voices to try to provide that message at the same time too. Not just, here's the energy savings for a thermostat. Did you know that by having a smart thermostat, these are the cool things that you can now do, right? And that's where we've got to get to. So we're communicating experiences rather than here's a product and you get $10 off when you buy it.
Yeah, and energy providers and utilities may have the ear of a different type of customer, right? So likely have much higher trust and loyalty, from older populations than say, those in the technology space that level of brand loyalty or trust, or that just tuning your ear to what's going on from those types of companies is different for different segments. One segment that's been really interesting the past year, and we've seen a lot of interest from smart home players and energy players, is in the MDU space. So multi-dwelling units, multi-family type space, because when it comes to energy efficiency, there is a pretty rock solid value proposition there, especially when you think about it from the property manager's perspective. And Debbie Kimberly from Austin Energy also mentioned that she's really seeing in their market, which is 60% MDU, that energy efficiency and smart thermostats are really an amenity for MDUs now, and can raise the value of that unit and that rental. Paul, do you have perspectives on the MDU market and what you're seeing there?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that as one of the trends that we've been having discussions with MDU property management companies around, is very concerned about, how do I manage this property in an efficient way? How do I lower my footprint of energy usage? and smart thermostats, smart lighting are all great parts of that, of what gets pulled into that. And we certainly are seeing that from the inbound request. One of the things that I think we're all still trying to work through is, what does that business model look like? What is that delivery mechanism to that MDU for what we are providing? Is it packages? Is it hey, I'm going to come in, I'm just going to one fell swoop sell you all the product you need to do the whole complex, or is it a change that happens over time, or is it in phases? And each of the folks we're talking to all have different approaches. They're all coming at it from different ways. Some are concerned only about HVAC usage. Others are concerned about the total package. And then others want to give an advantage to their property to make it stand out from the other properties that are out in that same market. To say, hey, we have a smart community. That smart community includes smart energy usage. That's why you want to live here. This is the place to be. Yeah. And so I think we're going to continue to see that evolve over time. I do think that is absolutely a growing market. I know that you've got some folks on later in this session that are going to talk specifically about MDU in particular that have a lot more experience there. But we're certainly see it from our perspective, inbound request anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be taking questions from the audience here in just a minute, but I also wanted to get Brian's perspective on this as far as either engaging consumers and how Google Nest is thinking about that. And there are certain customer segments that are particularly interesting right now, whether it be MDU or other customer segments, and how you engage them.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think Paul really hit the nail on the head, and you as well, Jennifer, is like one of the important things is that a utility should not just plan on like, saying, hey, we've got a DR program and like, if we build it, they will come. I mean, that can happen. It does happen to some degree. And, companies like, John's and mine, we definitely do our part to try to recruit customers into those programs. Like, we're incented to do so. We're trying to do so. But at the same time, there is it's not just a trust factor, but it's an awareness factor, as Paul was referring to, that, the more times you can let a customer know, hey, there's this program, we want you to be a part of it, and here are the 3 reasons why. And the top reason is you get paid. We want to give you money. This is your money. We want to give it back to you. Can we please do that? And that's something that we also recognize that, many utilities, don't necessarily have that marketing muscle, right? And this is something that they need a little bit of support with. And a number of the DERMS providers that we're working with have developed that, right? You had Emily on earlier, and in Uplay, is a great example of an organization that's really kind of built up that ability to be able to do the marketing piece of it. Energy Hub has as well. Many of them have, and and others are still pure play on the technology side, right? And they're happy to kind of like have the control panel for you, but they're not going to develop the entire program around it. And I think that that's one of the choices that as a utility you make when you sign up with the DERMS. But the thing that you should be thinking about of it is not just load, but the program. And how do you get people to enroll in the program, and making sure that you set aside a budget for marketing, and that you're actually planning on, how are we leveraging our own PR team? How are we leveraging our network and connections with the news and the media? How are we leveraging our spend on advertising that we're already putting out there, or whatever we might be doing at a ballpark or whatever else? How do you get people to engage in that? Going to your question about channels for a moment, one of the things about MDU, very briefly, that I'll say is I'm very bullish on the opportunity overall. I'm still very concerned because I haven't seen a lot of ability to have it very easily solved for the customers, for the property managers, and everybody else in the stack. And I think that that's really important. ComEd actually came out recently with a program that I think is noteworthy on the efficiency side to help property managers be able to take advantage of incentives on the efficiency side. I believe, and forgive me if anybody on the call has a different program already and has had it for a while, but I believe it's the first of its kind in the US. But in addition to that, that's just like on the efficiency side, right? If you're trying to get people to actually enroll in DR, you have to think about competing incentives here, right? It's like the customer is normally the one that should be getting an incentive to be able to enroll the device and to continue participating. But It's the property manager that is often paying for the device. Should they get the enrollment incentive, or should the customer? And now if you're trying to split it, how does that even work? I mean, are you doing kind of like a Venmo thing? I mean, like, probably not. So, there's a lot to work out there. There's a lot of legal stuff that frankly you need to work out in terms of terms and conditions. A customer is going to need to sign terms and conditions with that utility to participate in that program. Are they basically doing that at the time of signing a lease with a property company? So there's a lot there that makes it more complicated, and we would love to work with any and all of you that are interested in trying to actually solve those problems. But one of the key problems is follow the money, right? And if you don't have a big enough incentive for either the customers or the property managers to participate, then you just added a whole bunch of complexity, but you're not going to get a whole bunch of load.
Yeah, those are some interesting complicating factors that you're bringing up. Actually, Parks has a planned property manager survey related to smart home and energy management platforms later this year. Shameless plug. So let us know if you're interested in what we're going to be researching there. But there's just so much interest, but also questions about how to approach MDUs, and so we want to talk to property managers. Well, I do want to squeeze in at least one question from the audience here. Travis, for you on the EV space, increased EV charging at home means that EV charging likely outweighs total HVAC loads, especially if there are 2 EVs in the driveway. Have you seen any approaches to smart energy management change to reflect that type of reality?
Such a good question. I mean, so, okay, let's put it this way. What I've seen is some terror, particularly amongst distribution utilities that have older grids. Because initially everyone said, oh, how is the electricity grid going to respond, and well, we need all these new power plants, and the reality in most cases is you don't need new power plants. The generation is not the issue. It's the distribution grid impacts, particularly when you end up having clustering, which we see tends to happen quite a bit and is starting to be substantiated based on publicly available data. So what do we do about it? The first thing that we do, is really pushing for energy efficiency. So like really pushing to try to get the overall base loads of the house down. The second thing is making sure to emphasize how important smart connected charging is, because people might have their first EV and think that they'll never switch over their truck, and then all of a sudden they fall in love with a Cybertruck, or who knows what, and we end up getting this double load factor. And so it's really important to be able to have a smart station so that you can run a DR program later or deal with that. And then what we're seeing the most advanced utilities doing is they are really spending time and effort to try to educate people about how little they actually charge compared to the typical plug-in time overnight, and then starting to run pilots to basically spread that load and get it outside of the duct and later on at night. And that really is, I think, a critical thing to do. When we're looking at air conditioning, that I would say is even more important in terms of the timing piece. So that's really, I think, where the opportunity is.
Interesting. Well, unfortunately, that's going to have to be the last word. I feel like we could have kept conversing and discussing for a while there. And in fact, let me take the time to mention that after this session closes here, we do have networking discussions that open in a Zoom room. So if you'd like to kind of take the conversation out into the hallway, the virtual hallway, if you will, join us in the Zoom room. Our team should be adding a link to the chat so that you can easily hop over there from our platform. But thank you so much to all of our speakers. I really appreciate your insights today. I appreciate you participating. Also, let me thank our sponsors, Midgley, Austin Energy, Osiaco, Flow, and American Water Homeowner Services, and all of our supporter organizations as well, CEDIA, SCTE, Energy CIO Insights, Home Grid Forum, the Monitoring Association, and the Z-Wave Alliance. Please reach out to us if you do have research needs. I mentioned that MDU study that we're doing later this year, but we also, of course, have our energy-specific research and research across the connected home. And up next, so we can break out into our networking discussions now. We're back at 2 o'clock Central Time. And from 2 o'clock to 4:30, we will be having a whole new session discussing home services, rethinking the utility revenue models. Thank you all. We'll see you back here at 2 o'clock and in the networking room.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Capice, and I am a Strategic Account Manager for Parks Associates Executive Conferences and Custom Marketing Services. First, I want to thank our sponsors for supporting our event today. Your combined and individual support helps make our events possible. As you may know, Parks Associates is a woman-owned and trusted market research firm with an excellent reputation for our research and executive conferences. While 2020 is a year that we will certainly never forget, it remains our goal in 2021 to serve and support our sponsors through our year-long virtual conferences and custom marketing services. Our conferences offer a unique combination of industry expertise and extensive consumer research and analysis, ensuring sponsors visibility to the right audience of our senior executives throughout the year. Connections, the premier Connected Home Conference, is celebrating its 25th year and hosting more than 1,300 senior executives from the smart home, security, connected health, energy, and home automation industries during sessions throughout the year. Our 12th annual Smart Energy Summit addresses the evolution of the customer utility market, the impact of COVID-19, and new opportunities to drive engagement in utility-sponsored programs and energy-efficient solutions. Parks Associates' 8th annual Connected Health Summit addresses opportunities for connected health solutions to empower consumers, caregivers, and providers to meet the growing demand, independent living, chronic care management, remote access, and wellness and fitness solutions. Our 4th annual Future of Video, OTT, Pay TV, and Digital Media brings together senior leaders to share insights on consumer adoption, churn, and spending on services, including the role of the connected CE in the growth of video viewing. If you are looking for new ways to engage with our audiences, increase your brand awareness, and network with our industry leaders, I would love to share with you on how to partner with Parks Associates to help provide your brand more visibility.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Kent, VP of Research with Parks Associates, and I'm joined today by Genevieve Grenier, who's the VP Chief of Strategy and Business Performance with Flow at Energy. Hi, Genevieve. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hi, so pleased to be there. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Why don't we start off today by hearing a little bit about Flow and what Flow offers and how you fit into the larger smart energy ecosystem.
Yeah, so we the company, it's funny actually because we've been like such veterans in the space. We've been around for the last 10 years. And when we're looking at all the timeline and things and how things are accelerating in the last years, we've come a long way. So we're covering all segments. So whether public, fleets, workplace, residential, our focus is uptime and reliability, with a strong element around energy management and making sure that whatever the network we're scaling, it's smart network and smart solution.
Wonderful. Well, so we are, of course, coming out of a year, more than a year, of really unique circumstances where consumers, commercial energy consumption and usage has changed quite a bit. Consumers' patterns of using vehicles and transportation generally has changed. Sitting in the EV and smart charging market, you're at a really unique position in the market to see a lot of those changes. Can you tell us a little bit about what this past year, 18 months has looked like from your perspective at Flow?
Yes, so what we've seen in charging patterns, especially on the public side or even like at residential front, because all our stations are connected. So we have like the real-time data all the time. We've seen like a slowdown in how people move and when they move. So, out of a sudden, in LA, for example, we've seen peak around 1 and 2 p.m. like moving and shifting away from the initial peak that was like around 5 and 6. So probably people doing errands and stuff like that. So what we're seeing is like for sure a slowdown in the last almost a year now. But what we're also looking is the fundamental of that industry are not changing. And this is what we were the most scared back in March, where we were like, okay, you know, will EV go through that very big stress test? And we were looking at prices of oil at the same time. So, and then end of July, what we realized is all the models that were sold that were internal combustion engine were in decline, where EVs were growing more in Europe than in North America, but you know, still going very strong in North America. So, you know, we now are looking with the latest announcement, a growing desire to accelerate that industry. And you know, consumer response is there, and you know, the demand, like it's like we're at a point where right now we need to make sure that we're fulfilling the demand that is coming.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think you used the term, you know, resilient, that the EV market is quite resilient, and maybe earlier in the year weren't sure how the market trends are going to develop, but given that that demand is there, we know that growing use and adoption of EVs means a lot more demand on the infrastructure on the grid. One of the key ways that electric vehicles cross over into the smart home sector, which we are talking about a lot in the Smart Energy Summit communities, is in charging, of course, whether it's a single family home and you're charging at the home, or you're charging as part of an MDU complex. Can you tell us a little bit about how that part of the market is evolving, and what we can expect over the next year or two?
Yeah, so, you know, as we know, 80% of the charging happens at home. And I'll talk about single family home because when it comes to multi-unit residential, it's much more complex to deploy infrastructure. So what we're seeing right now in the trends is that the EV penetration is greater in areas where people actually have a private parking, and in downtown cities where there's you know, dense urban areas and people can have to park on the curbside. This is where EV penetration is the lowest. But what we are looking at is in some pockets, and I live in a neighborhood where, fortunately or unfortunately for the utility, we have 10% penetration right now of all vehicles being electric. And prior to the pandemic, what was happening is everyone was going back from home and charging at the same time at 6 p.m. And it has like tremendous impact on the grid. So what we're looking at is how utilities and energy partner will respond also to that increase of demand. And we want to make sure that the grid can take it. And this is where aggregated solution like demand response will play a key role in how that infrastructure will roll out.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's something that we'll be talking about with many of the speakers throughout the Smart Energy Summit sessions from the utilities and energy providers perspective, use of demand response programs, the variety of connected devices in the home, EVs being one of them, and the charging infrastructure being one of them, and managing that load. And it is interesting to think about how long-term perhaps change in work and commuting patterns may impact that, especially if you have the time of charging spread out, if not as many people are doing the traditional commute, right? And more people are at home, and whether or not that changes trends. And so the ability to have that aggregated view and be able to shift your management of the load quickly and flexibly, right, to adapt to those patterns might be even more important.
Yeah, and you know, I think we'll see also an variation of what mobility used to be. So we'll see new patterns emerging, and I think all the energy players right now, they're looking at we're about like 2-3% of penetration of EVs right now. But if you push down the line and you're looking at, the next 5-10 years, they really need to plan accordingly, and they need to do it in a manner that they're not also stressing their grid at nighttime, where they can lower the transformer's lifespan. So it's a very interesting kind of equilibrium. And right now there's a lot of pilots that we are participating in, and the widespread of those pilots are still not there, but we're seeing some project having more traction, and where utilities want to be extremely proactive.
Well, Genevieve, thank you so much for your insights and telling us more about Flow and what you're seeing in the market right now. We appreciate adding your voice to the many voices in the Smart Energy Summit community throughout this year, and the many discussions that we have. So thanks very much for being here, for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.